Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2 Plus Tough, and recently I got a chance to play Warcry 2nd Edition in person with another human being, and it was awesome. This absolutely reinvigorated my love for the game system, and reminded me why I've said before that Warcry is their best game that Games Workshop puts out, which is the simplicity and the accessibility of it. We're going to talk about all of that in a separate video, but one of the things that it inspired me to do is pretty much comb through the various factions that exist for Warcry and starting to put together basic introductions and tactics and things like that for you. So letting you know basically how each warband works within the context of the game. What kind of vibe are they going for, in terms of design, or what their strategies seem to be, because sometimes they're not the same as they might be like with a full AOS army. How it translates over is not always intuitive, but hopefully this series will contain some information for you. So if you would like your faction covered, please leave it in the comments down below and give this video a like. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing today. It would mean a lot to me. When I was thinking of where to start with this whole series, I thought, why not pick up where I left off with my personal favorite warband that Games Workshop has put out, and that is the Corvus Cabal. I'm going to be throwing some B-roll up here just so you can take a look at them. These launched not with the original set, but very, very soon afterwards. They were, definitely part of the core thing of Warband, and they just look fantastic. I just love the aesthetic they went for both the assassin, the kind of like plague doctor mask thing that got going on, and the bird skulls. It really appeals to me. Now, in these videos going forward, what I'm going to be doing for a basic, guide, if you'd like, is we're going to talk a little bit about the warband's backstory, sort of what they're trying to represent on the tabletop. Then we'll move into a section called Bringing It to the Table, where we're going to sit down and actually review all of the unit entries in the faction. So if you have, questions about how X fighter fits into the overall scheme of things, we review the fighters and the abilities. And then I'm going to wrap it up at the end by basically asking the questions: what does this warband do well? What does it do really poorly, like strengths and weaknesses? And then who is it for? What kind of gamer would this appeal to? Because ultimately, that's what value comes from, is just if it appeals to you and it's something you enjoy, you will have significantly more value to it. So without further ado, let's jump in. The Corvus Cabal is a chaos unaligned warband, meaning this is a tribal society that does not revere necessarily the four chaos gods as we as readers know them, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, but rather chaos undivided. They worship the concept, the abstract horror as a whole. Like many other tribes that we'll be exploring, they also kind of depict it as a particular animal or some kind of reference or totem that they could recognize. In their case, they perceive chaos as the Great Gatherer, essentially a massive bird of prey with these huge black feathers, and it's perched atop a mound of treasure that's been stolen from weaker people. It's like meant to represent a light, lithe deity that is incredibly deadly, equipped with the best tools and takes what it wants. Now, within the context of their personal religions and how their wise men and women interpret this story, Archaon the Ever-Chosen fits into it because he is seen as an avatar of the Gatherer. He is the one taking armies into endless wars all across the realms, reaping these dead rewards, harvesting raw flesh in this material and offering it sacrifice. Like, it just echoes so much of their own belief system that they have built him into it. On a personal level between the two of them, and this comes from the short story about the Corvus Cabal in the original Warcry short story compendium, which I'll have an affiliate link to down below, just to be open and honest, but it is a fantastic book. What we learn from that is that they communicate with one another through very, very scattered speech. Like, they have almost their own language. They use and incorporate sharp cries like birds do. They also have complex hand gestures. Lots of non-verbal communication is happening. They basically can read each other without having to say a whole lot. So when they do say things, it's usually very important. Now, the way that this particular, tribe, clan, warband makes its living is it will often go to Chaos Lords and offer their services. Who do you want us to take care of? How can we aid in your battle? And here's the catch, is that they're a fantastic ally to have, because all they want to be paid with is what they can personally take from the battlefield. They're like true scavengers of war, but that is in service to their deity. So what does that mean in a practical sense? They're going to go after the most important people who probably have the finest, most valuable weapons and armor and that kind of stuff. If they're collecting their own payment, they will make it worth their own while, which often means you're personally hunting the targets that are the most renowned, the most important, and you can see very quickly why they would become very, very deadly. So based on their lore, I would expect something very fast, very deadly, maybe not tough or resilient, but can certainly deliver a strong blow. So let's move over to talking about the actual warband itself. I will have a link to the head page of this, but essentially all the core rules for all the factions for Warcry are free online. Go ahead and check down below. You can work your way towards the warbands of the 8 points. Now, how I wanted to structure this discussion is starting off by talking about the universal things that all of their fighters can do, things that only require the Corvus Cabal rune mark. So they have a reaction that anyone can use, a double, and also a quad. And so we're going to review those now. The reaction, Raptor Strike. A fighter can make this reaction after an enemy fighter finishes a move action visible to this fighter within 5 inches horizontally and vertically lower than this fighter. This fighter makes a bonus move action and must finish closer to that enemy fighter than they were at the start of the move action. If this fighter ends within 1 inch of that enemy fighter, this fighter does not suffer impact damage, and that enemy fighter suffers impact damage. This is an interesting one because the Corvus Cabal have always kind of been in this strange place because they use vertical terrain rules much more so than any other faction. They like to get the pounce on their target. It's kind of built in to the lore of the faction. But that becomes a problem when sometimes tables don't have quite as much terrain, where it's very dependent, right? It's a set of rules and bonuses that are great if you can get them, but you can't always count on getting. For me, when I look at Raptor Strike, what you can do with this is if you put your chumps, who are Cabalists, I believe is what they're called here, if you put those guys forward and up high, as the enemy comes to hit your second line of big hitters, which we'll get into, there are some awesome damage dealers in this faction, you can react with this and have one of your chumps go down and tie up an enemy in combat. It's a way to control people's movement around you. Now, to me, that's the real strength, because the other thing is like you don't suffer impact damage, your opponent does, but that's still like not a guaranteed thing. It could do nothing, it could do very little, you know what I mean? So like to me, the real value is what you can count on, which is now that person, instead of their second action maybe being a ranged attack or something, now that they have line of sight, now they have to like disengage or something. Again, it's a control-y playstyle. The next double that anyone can use at any given time is Raven Dart. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 8 inches of this fighter and roll a dice. On a roll of a 2 through 4, allocate 1 damage point to that fighter. On a roll of a 5 up, allocate a number of damage points to that fighter equal to the value of this ability. Honestly, this is a bit of a hard pass for me. I've never been a huge fan of anytime I have to spend an ability dice where I could get something guaranteed like +1 attack, +1 movement speed, to then have to roll a die. I'm not the biggest fan. There are other versions of this same kind of attack where you roll 2 dice and for each like 4 up it does the damage. Like that kind of stuff I'm more into because there's more chance of it happening. When you just roll 1 die and then you get like nothing, it's just kind of a sad feeling. I could generally use doubles better than that. Like say +1 movement speed, move and get someone up high so that I can trigger some of their other abilities. And this last one here sees us really cooking with fire, and this is Death from Above, which sounds very Space Marine in a drop body. This fighter makes a bonus move action, period. Awesome. Then they make a bonus attack action, period. Awesome. Okay, nothing bad here. It sounds a whole lot like the basic quad that anyone can do. But here's the stipulation. Add 1 to the strength characteristic of that attack action if the fighter finished a move action 3 inches or more vertically lower than their starting position. Use your free move. That means to go down a level and you still count. Even though you didn't use a move action, you're different places from your starting position. So yeah, I mean, as long as you can go downward at all, getting that extra bit of strength on some of these attacks is quite nice. The game that I played this last weekend was fantastic. I actually took one of the Spire Stalkers and had him, he was engaged with one enemy, so I had him attack. He killed that one. Then I triggered Death from Above. He got his free move. He went down vertically, got a free attack, which now he gets the bonus. He killed the second one, which also tied him up He jumped into 2 enemies basically, and then with his second action, because that was all part of an ability, he then attacks and kills a 3rd gore. So like it can go kind of crazy. We'll talk more about Spire Stalkers for sure. I love them. So the reason I covered the universal ones first is because we're going to look at every single one of these fighters with the lens of those are just part of the things that each one of them have access to. So let's jump into the actual fighters. We'll start with our heavier hitters first. Here we'll go in order. The Shadow Piercer, which is your only hero option for this particular warband, at least when you're starting off, comes in at 170. They get access obviously to a leader ability as well as this particular symbol. We'll get to that in a second. Her attacks, she has this huge meat cleaver of a weapon. I love it. Only ranged 1. You are at 4 attacks, strength 4, but if you hit, it does 2 damage, crits do 5. Imagine if you could get that to say strength 5. So let's talk about the Shadow Piercer's abilities here. The first one, her leader ability within this group, is Grizzly Trophy. A fighter can use this ability if an enemy fighter has been taken down by an attack action made by them this activation. So if the Shadow Piercer kills somebody, then she can use this immediately. Until the end of the battle round, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of melee attack actions made by visible friendly fighters while they are within 9 inches of this fighter. Now on the whole, I actually really love the amount of attacks that even the most basic fighters in this faction get, because definitely when you talk about comparing them to like Gloomspike gets or something like that, they can seem a little bit better. And so giving them +1 attack when you have abilities that can, you know, also give you strength and stuff like that. Now, of course, that's kind of an idealistic world to get both of those things in a turn. But the truth is, like, it's a good ability, but situational. I've never really made use of it because it means having my Shadow Piercer go first, ideally, right, to get the most benefit. But usually I like to have her go last because she is a good, like, finisher, right? If you're trading pieces and you save her for last, that 2 and 5 damage can rock somebody's world. So I'm not the biggest fan of that, but her other ability is quite interesting, and that is because she has a bird. There's a Cabalist with a familiar, they call it as well, and she has a familiar on her arm, so she gets access to this as well, and this is Harrying Raven. It's a double. Pick an enemy fighter within 20 inches of this fighter until the end of the battle round. That fighter cannot make disengage actions. I have made wonderful use of this ability, specifically if you ever draw a mission where you have to kill a certain battle group or character or something like that. You can run out a cheap Cabalist to get them in combat just to literally pin them in place, and then you spend the double either from the Shadow Piercer or the Cabalist with familiar. They can't disengage. You got them trapped, and now everything can just descend. And that's exactly what it's meant to do, right? The bird call goes out and all the bird people go, oh man, I'm needed somewhere else, and they all just flock that way. Even if you're not going to take the Cabalist with familiar, which I'm not really opposed to. I think it's still a good control piece. This is a fantastic leader ability to just point in a single direction. The opponent can't run away, and then everything just goes for it. Moving on to the Shirke Talon. This is definitely one of the most eye-catching models of the entire warband. I call him Bird Person. Mine is always called Bird Person. It drives my opponents crazy, but I like him. Here he is on the top right over here, and he looks like he would be the leader of the warband, but in fact it is the Shadow Piercer. It's kind of look confusing, but yeah. So he clocks in at 210 points. This is your big right hook fighter, okay? He's not in super tough. He's tough 4, which is good for a more elite character, but like if a more elite fighter from your opponent's side comes at you, he's not gonna like do outstanding in terms of survival. But where he shines is his combat ability. So he has a 1-inch ranged attack, 5 dice, which is terrific because plenty of ways to get more dice to that pile. Comes in at strength 4, which is about average. That's nice. Certainly when it comes to knocking out little chumps. And then his damage profile is 2 and 4s on the crit. So 2 damage, 4s on the crit. When he can do 5 dice, and if he doesn't attack, I mean, it's great. And he separates himself from the others because he has an 8-inch move, which is, it's just phenomenal, because then you can get him into position to be able to use those jump down abilities, which we have another one to talk about here, very easily. Turn 1, he can move 16 inches, provided there's no twist or anything like that messes it up. He can get up somewhere. His ability is also pretty cool. It's called the Swooping Attack. This fighter makes a bonus move action, period. Already good, I love bonus move actions. In addition, if this fighter finishes a move action 3 inches or more vertically lower than their starting position, they can make a bonus attack action. And that one's a triple, which it doesn't matter about the value, so that is a great one to have in your pocket. You know, oftentimes you can easily roll a double. I know we all have times where that kind of goes awry, but you can certainly roll something useful, or at least take a wild die and make a double. I don't know. It's or make a triple rather. I'm so sorry, I misspoke there. But I like it. I don't always look at it necessarily as the free attack. Sometimes just a free move is definitely worth it as well. If you happen to roll a triple on round 1, I would absolutely use that on him, even though you're not attacking anybody. But use that third movement of 8 inches to get wherever you want him to be, so that next round you are set up and primed. Next up is my personal favorite of the faction, the Spire Stalker. So clocks in at 130 points. It's kind of like your lowest elite fighter, right? Not the chumps, but the one right above that. As far as their attack profile goes, 1 inch range on their attack. They are rolling 4 dice at strength 4, so again, another kind of average one. And their damage profile is also 2 and 4 on the crit. Now they traded that in for a little bit of speed because they only have a movement of 5, toughness 4, and 15 wounds compared to the Shirke Talon or Bird Person's 20. So there is an obvious trade, and they lose access to, of course, the Shirke Talon's ability, but I like their ability as well because it is a double, meaning it's very easy to get a hold of. You can guarantee that you can get it if you need it for using a wild die. Swift climb. Until the end of this fighter's activation, do not count vertical distance moved when this fighter is climbing. So it's not fly, nor does it really boost their technical movement stat or anything like that, but by ignoring upward measuring, you can get to some really weird places with these guys in terms of setting up a counterattack. The reason I love Spire Stalkers is because they're fantastic at piece trading. When the enemy chumps go forward and your chumps go forward, they are fantastic as a good, counterpunch. If you can get them into position where they can attack, they'll shred quite a bit of cheap chaff units. And the missions that I have had a chance to play have featured a lot of you're trying to compete for how many fighters you can get to a certain area. These guys can shred through anything, given enough time. Being able to give them death from above is quite fun. I talked about my experience doing that this last weekend. They're just my MVPs. Between the amount of board presence they can have by ignoring vertical terrain and mixed with what I'm going to say is just a strong counterpunch. I mean, that's all it is to it. Now I'm going to kind of lump these all guys together because they all have pretty much the same stat line. The basic chump of the Corvus Cabal are called Cabalists, which makes perfect sense. They come in 3 flavors. There's the base one, which has 2 daggers. There is the Cabalist with Spear, which, go figure, has a spear. And then there is a Cabalist with Familiar, which we've kind of discussed before. The basic Cabalist, the one with just the most cheapest armor and layout or whatever, 65 points, which is quite nice in terms of their affordability. Comes in with a 1 inch range attack, 4 dice at strength 3. Again, he's the chump. And his damage profile is 1s on the hit and 3s on the crit. The next version here is the Cabalist with Spear. And this one clocks in at 80 points, so a 15-point increase. That's interesting. So let's see what we get for that. They get a spear weapon, which has a 2-inch range attack, which is quite nice for lending aid if you're going to be kind of bringing all your force to bear on one particular area at a given time. Still rolling 4 attacks. That's terrific. Strength 3, and their damage profile is 1s on the hit and 4s on the crit. Now, I know it's anecdotal. I did have exactly 1 game where my Cabalist with Spear just absolutely wrecked house, just went full, I don't know, Brad Pitt and Troy style, but I'm not taking that as gospel. I rolled some fire dice at that moment, which can happen. I mean, and that's why these chumps are great is, they only have 8 wounds, toughness 3. They're not built to last, but they can present a threat that your opponent has to deal with, especially in numbers. And they're cheap enough that if you take a basic one, feel free to use your, universal ability where you can get a out of activation movement, tie down and engage enemies. They're cheap enough that you can do that. The Cabalist and the one with the spear don't have any abilities outside the universal ones, which we already covered. I don't particularly want to use, depth from above on one of these guys because they're quite weak, even if they do get the downward movement or whatever. But I do like the idea of using them to control the board space by the reactions they have access to. It's a shame their double isn't more interesting than like the Kurari dart that does nothing. The last version clocks in at 70 points and is the Cabalist with Familiar. Attack profile is the exact same as just the basic Cabalist. All they do is gain access to that bird ability, which stops an enemy from being able to withdraw. So that one is much more of a toolbox choice rather than just filling out the roster. I personally like to bring one because then I'll have them in different battle groups, the Shadow Piercer and the Cabalist with Familiar, and that way I can, generally speaking, control where my opponent is. If there's somebody I need to get, I will be able to lock them down. So let's bring it in and talk about, now that we have an idea of how the Warband plays and what the various units are, their strengths are, and what the abilities are, let's bring it together. What is the Warband good at? Well, I do feel like they play up the assassin motif well, that there are ways of pinning an opponent that you deem to be either the highest priority or the biggest threat, and then having ways to descend upon them. It definitely rewards people who like building fun tables with lots of terrain, like myself. I love having lots of buildings and things because there's just more space to use. In fact, in the stories, all we see for the Corvus Cabal is they're like Assassin's Creed running on top of rooftops. Can't really do that a lot of times with the base deployment opportunities that Warcry gives you, but there are rules for building your own tables, of course. All I'm saying is a lot of their abilities have access to vertical, rules things. If you have a local Warcry group and you see a Corvus Cabal player struggling, try throwing in an extra building, just something. Their ability is very interesting. I like out of sequence movement activation, so their reaction that they can all make by getting a free movement. If somebody ends within 5 inches of them, they get a free movement, and if they go downward, then the impact damage translates to their opponent so long as they end within it. Now, the impact damage is a nice plus, but it's not something I'm counting on as an attack. To me, the real value is that person just spent their first action moving. They were probably not hoping to spend their second action hitting this chomp. They probably wanted to move to a better position or attack, I don't know, depending on the length of their weapon or whatever. I don't know. It's a great control way to like choke up certain areas. Now people are spending actions dealing, either disengaging or fighting with this nobody Cabalist worth 65 points that's totally disposable instead of doing what they want, which, just like an assassin's thing, would free up the main bulk of the Warband to pursue the main target. As far as where it struggles, there's kind of a few things. The big obvious one is if the table doesn't have a lot of vertical terrain, they will struggle. And this is actually an interesting thing they brought up in the game version Catacombs. They gave them some extra abilities that were supposed to simulate like running on walls and things like that, which is cool. But outside of Catacombs, their abilities are very much dependent on terrain. Not that they're dependent, the effectiveness of them. What makes them unique and different is very dependable on the table. Nothing has above toughness 4, which, it's nice to have one tank or something like that. Like, I love taking an Ogroid Myrmidon, just to have a big wound pool, just to have something to anchor around. But yeah, I do believe that this Warband, more so than a lot of other ones, rewards you for being aware of piece trading. So that is, I don't mind if my opponent kills Cabalists. I want my Spire Stalkers and Shadow Piercers to go in there and just clean house, right? I'll trade pieces day and night, and as long as my heavy hitters are alive, I'm awesome. What that means is they then become a liability if you play against a faction that has incredible shooting or ways to shut them down, debuff them, that kind of thing. What I'm saying is there's a great potential to get sniped early if your heavy hitters go down, because your Cabalist will struggle to do anything. Now, one of the things I like to answer is, who is this faction for? Like, what kind of player? Let's say you're not just smitten like I am with the aesthetic and I'm just going to learn how to play them anyway. What if you were approaching this like, how do they play? Who is this for? I would say it's for control players, to use a Magic the Gathering term, but there's better factions at doing it. It rewards you, weirdly enough, for really understanding the universal abilities, because those are often better than the options you get here outside the context of movement thing. If you're going to be moving, and if there is a possibility of vertically ending up lower than where you started, then that's when the Corvus Cabal abilities really shine. Anything other than that, you're really leaning into the core universal. And it's not like a bad thing, because the basic Cabalists have a fairly okay stat line, in terms of getting an extra movement or an extra attack. That attack can be meaningful, so it's not terrible. It's just you got to know the limits of everything. Like I said, that if you're struggling to use them, I recommend trying to add some kind of beefier character in there so that if there's an objective they need to go to, the rest of the light assassin things can go deal with enemies, and your chonker can go sit on the objective and win you the game. Anyway, friends, that'll do it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this review of the Corvus Cabal. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments down below, because that tells me what kind of content to make. And if you would like to also say what faction you would like me to cover next. I'm going to be kind of doing these in batches, and so it'll just kind of direct my conversation for the next set. Thank you so much for watching. Happy wargaming.